I will leave and grab your seaweed. I will fist you out. When you return, I will follow you home and grab your seaweed. If you spit on your hand, I will murder you while I'm alive. I will murder you and eat your ass. Hello. Hello. You are currently watching this in the future. I am currently recording this after we did our little quickie stream on Thursday. And then Aiden and I have been fixing stuff on the computer. There are still a couple things that are downloading, but he said it should not affect. Also, laundry is going because we're still getting ready for Hawaii, but when this video drops, I will be in Hawaii. So all good things. And this after movie night, we watched 50 First Dates. So, yeah, sorry that's going off right now. Perfect. But we are going to be reading. This is like my fourth time restarting. We are going to be reading chapter 7. Chapter 7 is a very, very girthy one, so I'm just going to get into it. It is very long, so tuck in. Get your blankie. I have my blankie ready to go, and we're going to do this thing. So, chapter 7, Is It Killing You Like It's Killing Me? March through April 2017. Rory. The email from Chris had caught her off guard. Jess sent me your manuscript. I'd be honored to help you shape it for publishing. Could we set up a meeting to discuss? I'd love to go over some initial thoughts with you. She had reread the lines at least a dozen times, her stomach dropping with each pass, not from excitement, but from the hollow ache of abandonment. Jess hadn't said a word to her about it. No email, no call, no message, nothing. He had just handed it off, like her story was inventory to be moved, like the months of sleepless nights she'd poured into those pages were just another submission crossing his desk. She wanted to be angry. Hell, she was angry. Really properly angry, but in a way that made her feel petty and small and completely unjustified all at once. Because wasn't this exactly what she should have expected? It was like nothing had changed. Jess's inability to communicate, his avoidance and need to run. Why had she so foolishly thought this time would be any different? She didn't need him, she reminded herself. He didn't owe her anything, and nothing fundamental had changed. She could do this alone, just like she had planned all along, just like she'd been preparing to do since the moment she'd seen those two pink lines. But still, she had to admit it stung. She kept trying to make the disappointment make sense, like maybe this is his way of keeping his promise without getting too close, without having to sit across from her and dissect every word she'd written about their history. And really, if she was being honest, how could she have been fully truthful about their story if he was the one editing those chapters? How could she write about what their relationship had really meant to her, about the feelings she'd never been able to articulate, if he was going to be the one marking up every vulnerable sentence? The irony wasn't lost on her. In many ways, his avoidance had actually freed her to tell the whole truth. Now she could go back and write what she'd been too afraid to say before. She could stop protecting both of them in her own story. Maybe his silence was a gift, even if it felt like betrayal. And after all, what right did she really have to be angry? What did she expect? That he would just drop his life, his plans to come be by her side and volunteer to help raise a child by the man she knew he loathed? If the situation were reversed, if Jess had gotten someone else pregnant, even if he didn't want to be with that someone, it would have hurt like hell. She probably would have done the exact same thing. Let him go, like her mother had done with her father when Sherry got pregnant. The mature, selfless thing is in an impossible situation. But knowing she had no right to feel something didn't make the feeling disappear. If anything, it made it worse. Anger layered with guilt, hurt, wrapped in shame. She sent an email back to Chris confirming a date and time for mid-April. Thank you, yes, that works perfectly. Looking forward to it. She had to keep it going. What choice did she have? The same afternoon, Paris called in a panic. I need you to watch Gabriella and Tim for 2 hours, 3 tops. Doyle gave Clementine the day off. I mean, I get it. The stairs are a nanny killer. Occasional reprieve is necessary, but of course he conveniently forgot we have couples therapy. Again, despite it being in his phone calendar, on the fridge calendar, and mentioned at breakfast this morning. I'd cancel, but our therapist already thinks we're resistant to process, which we are, but I refuse to prove her right. That was how Rory found herself trying to convince a 4-year-old that square sandwiches tasted exactly the same as triangle cut ones, while her brother seemed to view lunch as a full contact sport. By the time she negotiated the crust versus no crust debate and prevented multiple grape juice spills, she was already exhausted. Maybe this was good practice. If she was doing this alone, she would probably learn how to keep small humans alive, right? Okay, who wants to play a game? She asked with a forced enthusiasm, mentally calculating how many more hours until Paris and Doyle returned. It was during an intense round of building blocks, which Tim kept gleefully throwing and destroying, that Rory realized her phone wasn't in her pocket. She checked the couch cushions, the kitchen counter, retraced her steps. Nothing. Gabby, did you see my phone? The black rectangle I had earlier? The little girl's eyes went wide with theatrical innocence. No. Tim. The little boy giggled and pointed toward the bathroom. Oh no. Her heart sank before she even reached the doorway. And there it was, floating face down in the toilet bowl like a sad, expensive brick. Oh, come on, she muttered, fishing it out with a wad of paper towels. The screen was completely black, dead. She tried the power button and nothing. Held down various combinations of buttons and still nothing. Gabriella appeared in the doorway, her expression now guilty. He wanted to give it a bath. He said phone gets dirty. They do, Rory agreed weakly, staring at the dripping device in her hand. Just not that kind of bath. She buried it in a container of rice she found in Paris's meticulously organized pantry, though she had zero faith in that particular remedy. The phone was done for. She could feel it. By the time Paris and Doyle returned, looking marginally less tense than when they left, Rory had gotten both kids down for a nap and was sitting at their kitchen table, staring at the rice-filled container like it might resurrect her phone through sheer willpower alone. Oh God, what did they do now? Paris asked, immediately assessing the scene. Your children drowned my phone, Rory said flatly. I think it's dead. Of course they did. Doyle pressed his lips together, clearly trying not to smile. Sorry about that. We'll buy you a new one. You mean you will? Paris glared at him. They clearly learned that kind of destructive behavior from you. It's fine. It's just... Rory stopped herself, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the afternoon crash over her. The chaos, the constant vigilance, the sheer relentlessness of keeping 2 small people fed and entertained and alive for just a few hours. God, Paris, how do you do this every day? Poorly, Paris said, dropping into the chair across from her. That's why we're in therapy. Rory laughed, but it came out shaky. I can't even handle an afternoon with your kids. How am I supposed to do this alone? You are not doing it alone. You have your mother. You have me, Lane, everyone. Paris's voice softened slightly. You're more capable than you think. Besides, I've got contacts at some of the best nanny services in the city. I'll make some calls and send some recommendations. Rory just smiled and said thanks, despite knowing that affording that kind of nannies Paris was referring to would not be an option. She was doing this on her own, whether she felt ready or not. That night, back in her apartment with no phone until at least tomorrow morning, Rory lay in bed and let herself spiral. 16 weeks left, give or take. 16 weeks until she'd be responsible for an actual human being who would depend on her for everything. who wouldn't care that she had no idea what she was doing, who would need her every single day without exception. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered to the dark room, to the tiny person who couldn't hear her, who was coming anyway, ready or not. And underneath the fear, threaded through every anxious thought, was still anger at herself, at the situation, at Jess, even though she knew she had no right to feel that way. She had no claim to his time or support. She understood why he walked away, but understanding didn't make her feel any less furious that he had. 2 months. It had been 2 months since that night in her apartment, and he hadn't reached out once, hadn't asked how she was doing, hadn't acknowledged any of it beyond sending her work to someone else to deal with. She stopped checking her email obsessively after the first few weeks, had stopped hoping her phone would light up with his name, but the anger hadn't faded. If anything, it had settled deeper, mixing with fear and exhaustion into something hard and resentful. If he really wanted to be in her life, he would have tried, would have picked up the phone, would have shown up, hell, would have at least acknowledged her book, the file she sent of what she thought perhaps foolishly might change things between them. And apparently not. She didn't need him. She kept telling herself that until it felt true. But damn, even if just for tonight, it would have been really nice to hear his voice. Mid-April. Midtown was alive with noise, horns, sirens, and the faint smell of roasted peanuts from a street cart down the block. Standing outside the new truncheon space in the mid-April sunshine, Rory's stomach churned with more than just nerves about her book. She knew there was a risk he'd be here, but she couldn't lose the opportunity, couldn't appear ungrateful or unprofessional. This was her book, her future, and she wasn't going to let her complicated feelings derail the best chance she'd had in years. Inside the building, construction was in full swing. Contractors crowded the space, scaffolding rising toward the ceiling as they worked on securing high beams. Voices called measurements back and forth, while power drills whirled, others anchoring bookcases to the wall. The space was a mess, but she could already see its character forming in that deliberate, delicate, curated way that seemed to scream his name. Tall windows lined the front wall, letting the late afternoon light that caught the dancing dust motes in the beams. The bookstore and the publishing house was fully taking shape. Soaring bookshelves lined the walls, some fully stocked, others half empty, and waiting for the right books to fill them. Framed pieces of art were scattered between them, simple but thoughtful choices that made her wonder who on his team had recommended them at all. They weren't the kind of polished pieces that would make it into a gallery, but they felt honest and right, capturing something raw about storytelling that seemed to fit naturally with the space. A small stage at the front of the room, similar to the design of the Philly location, which she assumed were for readings. Rory could already picture Jess there, leaning against the podium with a casual confidence, introducing authors whose work he believed in with the same intensity he'd once reserved for arguing about Curiosic. Upstairs, the loft-style offices were open and unfinished. Desks covered the books, and loose pages that suggested urgent, important things were happening here. The black iron railing looked freshly installed and overlooked the main floor, giving her a vantage point of the world below. She could see his hand in every detail, the exposed industrial bones and the way natural light had been prioritized. This was all Jess, and she knew how hard he must have worked to build something meaningful, a place people would choose to return to, and despite her complicated feelings towards him right now, she was proud of him. She took the stairs to the second level, her pulse quickening with each step. Relief washed over her at the landing. No sign of Jess so far. Chris was already at a desk, surrounded by papers, reading through her manuscript with the kind of focus that made her nervous just watching him. Anticipation tightened in her stomach as she waited for him to look up. The smell of old paper and sawdust lingered in the air, mixing with something else, something familiar that made her question her sanity. Maybe it was his cologne, the particular scent that had haunted her since January. Or maybe it was just her imagination conjuring up ghosts. Chris finally glanced up from the pages and broke into a genuine grin. "Rory, glad you could make it. Traffic wasn't too brutal?" She set her bag down gently. Not too bad. Wow, the place is really coming together. Sorry about all the noise, Chris said, gesturing at the construction around them. I would have asked you to meet at a coffee shop, but I had to be here this morning for final sign-off with the contractors. Rory nodded, letting her gaze drift across the exposed beams, the narrow reading stage below, keeping a reluctant eye out for any familiar movement. It's fine. The place looks really great. How are you feeling about everything? Chris let out a long sigh. I'll be excited when it's done. What a headache it's all been. Permits, delays, budget overruns, but we're getting there. Hard to believe it's been over 10 years since I came to the Philly open house. You guys have come so far. Yeah, that's right, Chris said, his expression shifting slightly. Sorry we didn't get to connect more that night. I remember you being there, but things were pretty hectic. There was something in his tone that made Rory wonder exactly how much he understood about her history with Jess. She felt the tension of unspoken knowledge hanging between them. Well, Chris continued, I have to say, I'm annoyed Jess has been hiding your writing talent from us for so long. But you know how he is. Rory just nodded. She wanted to ask what exactly Jess had said about her, what Chris knew, but she forced herself to stay professional. I really appreciate the opportunity. I don't want any favors because of my connection to Jess. I just want to work for this. What, are you kidding? Chris laughed, tapping the manuscript. This is good. Really good. Better than good, actually. I don't know. Rory let out a nervous laugh. It's still rough. I've been writing in pieces and trying to finish before. She glanced down, her hands instinctively moving to rest on her stomach where the baby had been increasingly active, as if responding to her own stress. Before things get too busy, I know it needs work. Chris nodded. Sure, but the voice is there. It's clear, grounded, honest in a way that's rare. You're not performing your trauma, you're examining it. The structure could use tightening in the middle third, and there are a few transitions we'll want to smooth out, but you've got the bones of something really compelling here, something that will stick with people. She tried to smile, but her posture stayed tight, bracing for disappointment even in the face of praise. Sometimes I worry it's too personal, too raw, like I don't know if you guys can hear my dryer's going off, sorry. Sometimes I worry if it's too personal, too raw, like I'm asking strangers to witness something they shouldn't see. Messy's not a bad thing, Chris said, leaning back in his chair. Memoir-adjacent books do best when they're honest, when they resist the urge to tie everything up in this neat little bow. And yours has honesty and also pacing and stakes and moments of levity that keep it from being relentlessly heavy. Maybe, Rory interrupted, shifting uncomfortably, you don't think it's too honest? Not at all. The way you write about your relationship with your mom, that complicated love, the humor in hard moments, being best friends while still atoning for mistakes. Every overachieving millennial will see themselves in this story. And honestly, I think the next generation will too. They'll recognize the burnout, the overcorrection, the spectacular wrong decisions. Rory gave him a half smile as she pulled out her notebook. He flipped through a few pages. Though we'll want to tighten some of the things up in the middle, make sure that the pacing stays consistent, and I'd love to see you dig deeper into those class dynamics, the way you move between worlds, Stars Hollow, your grandparents, Yale. That tension is fascinating. She nodded, jotting down his observations as he spoke. He paused. But the core, the way you capture the push and pull with your mother, wanting to be her and wanting to be different from her at the exact same time, that's what's going to resonate. You really think so? The question came out smaller than she intended, revealing more vulnerability than she'd meant to show. I do, he said simply, and something in his certainty made her exhale slightly. I'm thinking we aim for spring 2018 release, March or April. That gives us a few months to finish development edits, copy edits, and formatting, and then we'd get get arcs out by fall for early reviews. You've got some name recognition from your journalism work, which helps, but this will still need to be billed by word of mouth, book clubs, podcast interviews, small venue readings. If you're open to doing the promotional work, I know it's not always easy for writers, but I think we can position it really well. She nodded slowly, letting the timeline settle in her mind, trying to picture herself a year from now with a baby, with a book, with a life that looked nothing like what she'd planned. I've already started thinking about the cover, she added, her voice soft. What kind of feeling I want it to have. Good, Chris said, making a note in handwriting that reminded her oddly of Jess's. We'll loop you in with our design team. Something warm, maybe even a little nostalgic. We want to capture the sense of intimacy and connection your story has. Literary memoir territory, the kind of book people press into their friends' hands. He tapped the pen against his desk. And I'll have our lawyer draw up a contract for you to review. Nothing too complicated, but we'll want to get the basics sorted before we dive into edits. I also want to start talking blurbs soon. Maybe someone in journalism or women's nonfiction, someone whose opinion you respect. Rory blinked, her mind immediately jumping to names, faces, women whose works had shaped her understanding of what it meant to tell difficult stories. Yeah, I think I have a few people I could reach out to. Perfect, Chris smiled, and she could see why he and Jess worked so well together. There was something both professional and genuinely kind in his manner. We'll get the development edit letter to you in the next 2 weeks. In the meantime, keep writing if you've got energy for it. Final manuscript deadline is mid-June, but the sooner the better. You've got momentum right now. They went over a few more points, photo options for the author bio, a short biographical statement, early press targets. Rory jotted things down in her planner, her fingers trembling slightly, but not from nerves, from something else, from the strange, unfamiliar feeling of doors opening instead of closing. For the first time in months, things felt possible again, tangible, like her life was finally moving forward instead of just happening to her. But then she heard it. His voice. It wasn't loud, just a few notes of a conversation drifting up from the main floor, but suddenly the air felt thinner. That voice, deep, familiar, animated in a way that meant he was passionate about something. The same voice that had whispered her name in the dark, that had argued with her about books and politics and the meaning of life, that had gone silent when she needed it the most. Her stomach twisted as she tried to glance subtly over the railing, telling herself to look away, to focus on Chris, to be professional. But there he was, Jess, pacing slowly across the bookstore's unfinished floor. Even from this distance, she could see he'd filled out slightly. Broader shoulders, more presence. Though she knew that beneath it all, he probably still carried that restless uncertainty that had always driven him. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms that made her mouth go dry with unwanted memory. A pencil was tucked behind his ear, and that familiar furrow creasing as it creased his brows as he talked animatedly to someone just out of her sightline. And then she saw her, the woman beside him, stepping into view as they moved toward the center of the space. Red blouse that looked like it had never wrinkled, wavy blonde hair that fell perfectly at her shoulders, confident in that effortless way that spoke of corner offices and client lunches, like she'd grown up navigating Manhattan boardrooms and could run the world in those pointed heels. Effortlessly pretty in a way that didn't require effort, that just existed as a fact of genetics and good skincare. The woman laughed at something Jess said, her hand finding his arm with a casual ease, and Rory's stomach clenched so hard she had to grip the edge of her chair. It was nothing. It was everything. Her pulse pounded as she tried to look away, forcing her attention back to Chris, who was still talking about marketing timelines, but it was useless. The way the woman leaned into Jess, the way he didn't step back, the comfortable familiarity of their proximity made her throat constrict in a way she didn't expect and had no right to feel. She had no claim to him. She knew that. She'd made her choice and he'd made his, and this was what moving on looked like. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different territories entirely. Right now, she was drowning in the space between them. And now, here he was, 20 feet below her, with someone else. Someone who hadn't broken his heart. Someone whose life was probably simpler. Someone who didn't come with all the history and baggage and pregnancy that made her feel impossible to love. She reached for her bag, fingers trembling slightly. The walls of the space suddenly felt too close, the air too thin. "Rory?" Chris asked, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts. "Everything okay? You look a little pale." She forced a smile that felt like a mask sliding into place. "Yeah, I'm sorry. I remembered I have to be somewhere." "Oh, no problem," Chris blinked, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in energy. "Let's just aim to have the second draft polished by August. Does that sound reasonable?" She nodded quickly, already mentally calculating her escape route. "Yeah, that sounds great. Perfect. And we'll be in touch about the cover concepts and the blurb requests?" "Absolutely. Thank you, Chris, really." "Of course." Chris rose from his chair and extended his hand. "Thanks, Rory. Excited for this." She shook his hand, noting his genuine enthusiasm, trying so hard not to be rude, but she couldn't help glancing toward the main floor below. She could hear Jess's voice growing more distant as his team moved toward what sounded like a back office. She stalled for a moment, making small talk about wishing him luck with the rest of the construction and even managing a light joke about hoping he keeps his sanity through it all. When the voices faded completely, she grabbed her bag quickly. She was halfway down the stairs, gripping the railing, when relief started to flood through her. The fresh air hit her as she stepped onto the sidewalk, and she exhaled shakily, like she'd been holding her breath for the past hour. The sounds of the city grounding her after the charged atmosphere inside. She made it. No awkward encounters, no painful small talk, no. She looked down at her hands and her stomach dropped. No planner. She'd left her planner upstairs. The ones with all the notes from her meeting with Chris, the timeline, the contact information, the deadlines, everything. "Shit," she whispered, staring back at the building through the glass doors. She could email Chris later, ask him to send her the details, but that would seem so unprofessional, scattered. And some of the notes were in her own shorthand, observations and ideas for her book that she needed, the kind of details that would slip away if it left solely to her memory. She took a deep breath and peered back through the glass doors. The main floor looked empty except for contractors focused on their work. No sign of Jess. His voice had been distant when she left. He was probably in some back office, deep in conversation about permits or contractors or whatever it was that consumed his attention these days. Quickly, in and out. She slipped back inside, her heart pounding with each step. Up the creaking staircase, the sound seemed impossibly loud now, echoing in the space a way that made her feel exposed, visible. But Chris was exactly where she left him, head down, absorbed in paperwork. Chris looked up as she approached, offering a polite smile. "Everything okay?" "Sorry, forgot this," she said quickly, reaching for her planner sitting next to his papers, exactly where she'd left it. She grabbed it, relief flooding through her. Almost there, just down the stairs and out the door. She could do this. She turned back toward the staircase. One step, that was all she managed. And then the world stopped. She slammed in something solid. Someone. The planner flew from her hands, pages fluttering and hitting the floor. "Whoa!" Strong hands caught her arm, steadying her before she could stumble backward. She looked up, heart hammering, and met dark eyes that widened with surprise. Jess. Hold on one second. He was breathing hard, like he'd been taking the stairs 2 at a time, rushing to grab something from his office. His hands were still on her arms, steadying her, and she found herself taking in everything about him. The warmth of his touch, how he'd casually left the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, revealing the smooth expanse of his chest, that intoxicating scent she'd tried so hard to forget since January. The proximity was overwhelming, disorienting. They were so close, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, close enough to notice how a few strands of his dark hair had fallen across his forehead in that effortless way that had always undone her. They stared at each other for a beat too long, her cheeks flushing at his proximity, at the way he was looking down at her with something that might have been concern or surprise or just shock. Rory? Jess, she managed, equally breathless as she stepped back slightly. His hands dropped to his sides immediately, but she could still feel the warmth of where they'd been. Sorry, I forgot my... She gestured helplessly at the panner all over the floor. Oh, right, he said quickly, bending to pick it up. When he strained and handed it back to her, the words tumbled out of her before she could stop them. What are you doing here? I mean... He ran a hand... Oh, this is him, sorry. Oh, right, he said quickly, bending to pick it up. When he strained and handed it back to her, the words tumbled before he could stop them. What are you doing here? I mean, he ran a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture she'd seen 1,000 times when he was flustered. Sorry, I just didn't realize you'd be in today. She looked at him uncertainly and caught the way his eyes glanced from her to Chris over her shoulder, like he was trying to piece together the loop he'd been left out of. Chris cleared his throat softly, barely above a murmur. Emailed you this morning about my appointments today. Right, Jess said, his jaw tightening for a second. Haven't had a chance to check. Rory caught the drift immediately. Chris had tried to warn him. The realization stung more than it should have. A small flare of annoyance mixed with hurt. Like maybe Jess really didn't want to see her. Like she was something to be managed, anticipated, avoided. Just meeting with Chris, she said, tucking a piece of hair behind her ear in a gesture that felt awkward. About the book. Yeah, of course. He looked down briefly, and she could see the embarrassment flickering across her features, an uncomfortable understanding of a mess of his own making. But there was something else there, too. A complicated mix of emotions she couldn't quite parse. That's great. I'm glad it's moving forward. They stood in silence for a few moments, uncomfortable, awkward, unsure of what to say. Then his gaze dropped just for a second to her belly, and she watched his expression shift a dozen micro-emotions before settling into something carefully neutral as he looked back up at her, forcing a small smile. Wow, he said softly, as his voice was exactly the same, warm and rough and intimate even in its restraint. Look at you. Yeah, she forced a smile, her hand instinctively moving to rest on her stomach. July 8th, just a few months to go. He nodded, and she could see him trying to formulate response behind the complicated tangle of feelings crossing his features. Good, that's good. Well, you look great. I mean, you always look great, but you seem good. Are you good? I mean, are you okay? Rory couldn't help but smile at how flustered he seemed. Yeah, I'm okay. Another stretch of silence. She waited for him to say something else, anything, an explanation, an apology, some acknowledgement of the last 2 months. But he just stood there looking at her like he didn't know where to begin. For what it's worth, I was worried about you, he said finally, his voice dropping like he didn't want Chris to hear. She scoffed. Apparently not that worried. I sent you a text, he said quickly. Oh, sorry, he said it defensively, so I'm going to do it defensively. I sent you a text, he said quickly, almost defensively. Few weeks ago. She blinked, caught off guard. You did? Yeah, it was kind of late, but he shoved his hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. I never heard back, so I figured you didn't want to hear from me, which is okay, I get it. She shook her head. I never got anything. What did you say? Dress shrugged, like he was deflecting. Just Wanted to know if you were okay. She stared at him, trying to piece it together. What night did you send it? I don't know, like 3 weeks ago? Late, around 11 maybe? Oh my God. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half frustration. That was probably the same night my phone died, like really died. Paris's kids dropped it in the toilet. I didn't get a new one until the next day. His eyebrows raised slightly. Seriously? Seriously? She shook her head in disbelief. Of course it would be that night. Let me tell you, they've got me really excited about having one of my own. The corner of his mouth twitched at her sarcasm. Almost a smile. Yeah, I bet. She felt herself smile back, and just for a second before it faded, something shifted in his face. Relief, maybe? So you didn't? No, I did not ignore you. Her voice softened slightly, some of the anger easing even though it didn't dissolve completely. 2 months was still 2 months. One text was still just one text. I thought you just never reached out at all. I should have tried again, should have called. Yeah, you should have. There was less bite in her voice now, but she still couldn't mask her disappointment. Rory, he looked genuinely ashamed. I'm sorry. It's fine. But the smile she gave him was forced. Chris must have sensed the changed atmosphere because he was suddenly stepping forward, clapping Jess on the back with an apologetic but teasing grin in an effort to change the subject. Not sure why you've been hiding our new star author for all these years, Mariano, but we're lucky to have her. He turned back to look at her. I'm really excited about the book, Rory. It's a strong manuscript. We're going to do right by it. There was something careful in the way he had said it. Like he was trying to cover for Jess or just acknowledge the situation without making it worse. But it still landed wrong somehow. She found herself speaking before she could stop herself. Yeah, well, thanks for taking it on. Her voice was light, but carried an edge she couldn't quite suppress. I appreciate you stepping in. Jess's jaw tightened and his eyes flashing with something that looked like pain, obviously catching her meaning. Chris is great. You're in better hands with him anyway. He's right about that, Chris said with a grin turning playful as he shoved Jess lightly. You definitely got the better editor. Jess allowed it even though it was clear he was in no mood for jokes. Before either of them could respond further, Chris's cell phone rang. He glanced at it with an apologetic grimace. Sorry, better take this, he said, already moving toward the stair. But we'll talk soon, Rory. She nodded in appreciation as she watched him step away, leaving them alone in the suddenly too quiet space. The air between them that wasn't just uncomfortable, it was suffocating. Every breath felt deliberate, every second stretched with the memory of that night. Hands and hair and kisses on skin and words that had shattered everything. Months of avoidance had built up between them. All the conversation they hadn't had, all the explaining that would never be enough. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter now. I wanted to talk to you about it. About Chris taking the book. I didn't know if you wanted to hear from me after. He trailed off, looking away. I didn't know if I should reach out again. You could have tried, she said, but her tone had softened slightly. Before passing me off. I wasn't passing you off. He ran a hand through his hair. I thought you deserved better than me right now. Someone who could give the book the attention it deserves without all the other stuff getting in the way. She wanted to stay angry. She did, but there was something genuine in his voice that made it harder. It would have been nice to hear from you directly. You're right. I'm sorry. He looked at her then, studying her face. How are you doing? Really? The question caught her off guard, the genuine concern in his voice. I'm okay. Taking it one day at a time. He nodded slowly. If you need anything, I know, she said quietly. She felt too much standing here. Too many things she couldn't say. Too many feelings she didn't want to name. If she didn't redirect this now, she'd fall apart completely. So, the store looks great, she said, gesturing around the office with forced brightness. He looked around and gave a quick nod. Thanks, yeah, it's God, I think my brain might actually explode if I have to pick out one more light fixture, but it's coming together, I guess. There it was, this self-deprecating deflection he always did when he accomplished something real. Like he couldn't quite let himself own it. Well, at least you didn't choose anything with crystals, she said, the corner of her mouth twitching slightly. I was half expecting some sort of Gatsby situation. For a moment, his face softened, and he almost smiled for the first time since they collided on the stairs. Yeah, well, Matthew vetoed the champagne fountain, so we had to scale back our vision. She felt herself smile, probably for the best. Yeah, probably, he agreed, and for just a second, it felt almost normal, almost easy. But then, Jess! A woman's voice called from below, cutting through the moment like a blade. What's the holdup? We really need to go. The caterers are waiting, and I still need your sign off on the final menu choices. Then the sounds of heels clicked on the wooden stairs behind him, sharp and echoing. The blonde woman appeared, the same one Rory had watched from above. She was even more stunning up close, confident in that breezy, natural way that Rory had never mastered. The red blouse she wore was perfectly tailored, her makeup flawless, even at the end of what had been clearly a long day. She walked past them with the kind of familiarity that made Rory's stomach clench, reaching for some papers off of Chris's desk without hesitation, like she'd done it dozens of times before, like she belonged here and wasn't just visiting for the day. Jess sighed, his attention shifting to her. Yeah, I know. Just give me a second. Then the woman turned to Rory with a bright, welcoming smile that somehow made everything worse because there was no malice in it, no territorial marking or jealousy, just the natural friendliness of a woman who was confident enough in whatever she had with Jess that Rory registered as nothing more than a stranger. Hi, I'm Sarah, she said, extending her hand. Sorry to interrupt. I didn't realize Jessie was with a client. Rory forced a polite smile that felt like it might crack her face and shook the offered hand. Rory? And no, don't apologize. I was actually just leaving. Sarah's gaze dropped to Rory's belly and her expression brightened. Oh, congratulations. When are you due? July. How exciting! Sarah's warmth seemed completely genuine. Is this your first book with Truncheon? You're going to love working with these guys. It is, Rory said, keeping her voice neutral. Well, you're in excellent hands. Sarah glanced at Jess with something that looked almost playful. He's impossible about details, but that's why everything he touches turns out so well. Her hand rested briefly on his arm. Speaking of which, we really do need to go. Rory hated how the jealousy just twisted in her gut, the casual intimacy of that touch, the way the woman's hand had lingered on his arm. It reminded her viscerally of that summer in 2002, watching Jess with Shane, feeling that impotent fury at having no right to feel betrayed. Shane had been easy to dismiss. This was worse. Jess hesitated, his gaze moving between them like he was torn between wanting to move and to stay, like he was trying to navigate treacherous emotional territory. Finally, as if seeming to make a decision about something, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cream envelope and held it out to Rory, his voice slightly nervous. You should come to the opening. It's in a few weeks. It'll be a good night. Good for networking, if nothing else. His fingers brushed against hers, and she took it. The touch lasted maybe a second longer than it needed to. And Sarah noticed. Rory was certain she noticed. But her expression remained friendly. You should definitely come, she added, gathering the paperwork from Chris's desk. It's going to be a really special night. Jess has worked so hard on this place. Of course, Rory murmured, trying to keep her voice steady. Wouldn't miss it. He gave her a faint nod, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. Then Sarah's hand found his arm again, gentle but insistent. He stepped back slightly. Well, Jess said, his voice slightly strained. It was good to see you. You too, Rory replied, the words automatic but sincere. He hesitated for a second longer, his mouth opening as if he might say something else, then closing. Finally, he looked directly at her, his voice softer. You'll, reach out if you need anything. Rory felt something catch in her throat. She hesitated, the words wanting to scream at him rising. I already did, and you left me hanging. But she just nodded, unable and unwilling to reopen the wound. Jess studied her face for another beat, as if trying to memorize it, and then let Sarah pull him towards the stairs. Rory stood perfectly still, the edges of the envelope bending beneath her grip as she watched them go. Jess and Sarah, side by side, something easy and comfortable in their movement. She felt her imagination running wild with thoughts of working dinners turning into shared mornings, a kind of uncomplicated intimacy that felt like everything she'd never been able to achieve. She didn't know what they were to each other. She had no right to ask, but that didn't stop the dull, aching throb, the jealousy that tasted like regret and felt like drowning. She looked down at the envelope again, then closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, trying to center herself in the present moment instead of the past that seemed determined to pull her under. She had told herself that she was ready to move forward, that she had made peace with her choices and their consequences. So why did it still feel like she was standing perfectly still while the world moved on without her? That is the end of chapter 7. So thank you for watching this episode, and I can't wait. When we get back, we will get back into our Smutty Saturdays, and we'll start with chapter 8, and I'll hopefully be a little bit tan from Hawaii. Thanks for watching. Love you guys. Oh, wait, I'm supposed to do this. Forgot. If you're out on the road, and I'll be there on your next ass. If you leave, I will follow you home and grab your cheek. If you listen to me, I will leave and grab your teeth. I will fix you out. When you reach your end, I will follow you home and grab your teeth. If you sit on your hand, I will murder you.